10?
It's 10:40 now. Okay, so I think we're online. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning, if it's still morning in wherever you're connecting from. My name is Vladimir Kuchevsky, and NAFTA College and me personally, I welcome you to our next online knowledge sharing webinar. I'm sorry for a little background noise. It's pouring rain here in Moscow. I can't do anything about it. Let's hope it's a good sign anyway. So I'm happy to introduce our speaker for today. He's a tremendously experienced reservoir management professional, Mr. Ronnie Gunato. Ronnie started his career in Chevron back in 1997 as a petroleum engineer, developing a number of fields in Sumatra Basin before joining Total in 2004, where he was in charge of reservoir surveillance and development of a giant gas field in Mahakam Delta. Then he decided to go international for Petronas, working as the custodian for reservoir management in all producing oil and gas fields in Malaysia. Then he has been working in Saudi in numerous projects, gaining new experience in carbonate and intelligent field development. And then in 2012, he came back to Malaysia and joined Murphy Oil, which was recently acquired by PTTEP, where he led the development of Sarawak oil and gas fields. So currently, Ronnie is working as a subsurface manager for PTTEP for deep water field and supporting further Sarawak oil and gas fields development. So thank you, Ronnie, very much again for agreeing to be our speaker today. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Vladimir. Thank you. Nice to see you again.
True. It's nice to see you again too. And I want to ask our YouTube guests to please write something in the chat if you see or hear us, if everything is fine with the translation. Okay, I see the sign. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, guys. All right, so the topic for today's webinar is value protection and enhancement through sound reservoir management. So Ronnie, I think we're good to go. The mic is yours. Good luck.
All right. Thank you very much, Vladimir, for the kind introduction. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Hopefully everything is safe and sound. Today we're going to talk about the reservoir management, how we can protect the value or even enhance the value of our field with a proper or sound reservoir management. Let me start my screen now. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few concepts about the reservoir management, especially on the GOR management or the water flood management to optimize recovery of the fields. Then I'm going to go through some case studies in number of fields, how we identify the bypass oil, how we resolve some connectivity understanding, as well as on recompletion opportunity. So we're going to bring some concept and then later on how we implement and see the result coming out of the reservoir management. Okay, let me start off with some quick introduction on the field life cycle. As you know, that the field that we're producing is started back maybe from the basin analysis, as early as basin analysis, prospect generation, drilling a wildcat, appraisal, and so on. Now, the reservoir management is actually started as early as when we write the FDP, because the FDP will dictate what kind of development plan you want to have, and the reservoir management will be customized, will be tailored based on how you're going to develop and operate the fields. Yeah, appraisal sometimes becomes a very important process, because I've seen in many cases that the reservoir management or development becomes suboptimal because of no enough data during the appraisal. I've seen the cases, the project that you are underestimating the contact, for example, so you're leading into the suboptimal well placement, suboptimal the operating strategy, leading into the less recovery. Now, in the other instance, we also have seen that the case where you overestimate the fluid contact, for example, you think it is oil, not gas. So when you drill development wells, then you end up with a bigger gas cap. And certainly it will require a different way of operating or managing the field. So reservoir management started in the FDP in typical process, because this is also a requirement by some of the government to explicitly state what kind of the strategy that you want to do or you apply when you produce the reservoir. Then you go to construction, drilling, production until plug and abandon whenever the field is no longer economic. So the reservoir management will be continuous from the start of the production. It was planned before the production during FDP throughout the field life until the field is abandoned. Now the bottom left here is a typical profile of the cash flow, where we spend a lot of money in the beginning for your exploration, for your appraisal, for your study, for your construction, and so on. Then you start producing the reservoir. And this is actually where the reservoir management comes in place, is to make sure this revenue that you are generating out of the asset can really pay off all the costs and give the company maximum NPV or the value. Now, the way we develop the field could be in a number of ways. People develop, for example, in Malaysia, where we have mostly a saturated reservoir. So they develop in the one go with a single phase development, typically water injection, because majority it doesn't have strong aquifer. But in the other case, or in another country where you have low bubble point pressure, for example, you are in onshore environment, you take your time to produce and understand the reservoir behavior, taking a lot of data to understand how the connected volume, how the energy in the reservoir. So then you get the baseline production before you embark another development, for example, as a second phase, to make sure that you reduce the risk. Of course, during this kind of phase development, you will need also reservoir management to make sure that you do not overproduce the reservoir, for example, take the energy out of the reservoir too much, so you end up with the less total recovery at the end. Now, when we talk about reservoir management, it's a quite sensitive issue, especially in the countries that you have production sharing contract arrangement. So in some country like Indonesia, Malaysia, and some of the African country, the company, the international company, is given a certain period of operating the field, whereas the government or the country, of course, they have until the field life. So the reservoir management could work best in the long term, or could work best in a certain time within the PSC or sharing contract period, for example. So the discussion on the reservoir management between the government and the oil company could be tough to some point, because it has to satisfy both interests, the short-term interest for the company and the long-term interest for the government. So there could be a different strategy how to be achieving the higher recovery for the different time frame between the company perspective and the country perspective. Now, if you look at the typical resource distribution on the left, which is I'm sure you're quite familiar from the SPE-BRMS guideline. So we have the reserve, CR, as well as prospective resource. Now, our colleague in the GNG and exploration group, the job is try to move the prospective resource from the undiscovered petroleum in place to become the CR, become a discovered. Then the development team will change that CR after confirming the commerciality, go into the reserve category. So the reservoir management is further try to move more from the 2P, 3P category to the 1P category. So throughout the field life, as you apply a good reservoir management, so you will see a better performance. So you will be able to book more 1P and more 2P instead of 3P. And that exactly what will define the company's value in the market. So as you practice the reservoir management, you could end up with the higher 2P reserve. You could have a more reserve replacement ratio. You generate reserve more than what you produce, which is 100% more triple R, which is good for the company. So you can see the value, how the field has been operated with a good reservoir management and without good reservoir management. You will see that the performance could be quite different. Now, the one on the top right here this is the conceptual ideal EUR changes over time. So in the beginning of the field, you don't have a lot of data, so you are having very high uncertainty. The range between low to high is quite wide. As you drill appraisal well, then the uncertainty a bit reduced. Maybe you know where the contact is. Maybe you know a better idea about the reservoir quality and so on. Then you start producing a reservoir, applying the reservoir management. So then you manage the reservoir, then you converge into the one value between 1P, 2P, and 3P of EUR. Now, this is the idealistic profile where your initial estimation will be the same at the end of the field life. Of course, in real life, you could see this line here go up and down. Whenever we have some maybe poor reservoir management, you could see the black line here is going down. Now, if the black line is going up, it's not necessarily always the good case. It may also indicate that you are being conservative in your initial estimate, and you may miss some of the, I would say, a more optimum development strategy in the beginning, because underestimating, it could be also hurting the company as well as overestimating, because if you rework the brownfield, especially in the offshore environment, it will require a lot of cost and more complexity as compared to if you understand the potential overall in the beginning and you build a proper facility to get you the maximum throughput from your field. Now, the bottom right here, basically to give you an idea that in the mid case, you start with the prospective resource, you drill the appraisal well, exploration well, so you confirm become a CR. We don't know if it's commercial or not to bring it to production. Then we go into the FDP, is get approved, so you transfer the volume, become undeveloped, and you start the production. As the time goes by, you can see the production going up, and you are having a proven also getting smaller, but in the same time, it get transferred from probable to proof. By what? By a better field performance. And how we're going to get this better field performance? By applying a proper or sound reservoir management. Now, what is actually reservoir management? So if you look at the literature or many definitions, there's quite a number of definitions of what reservoir management about. But I want to quote one of the definition from the SP 26289. They said that reservoir management is the use of financial, technological, and human resource while minimizing the capital investment, the capex, and operating expense to maximize the economic recovery of oil and gas from a reservoir. So to me, there are three key words when we talk about reservoir management. The first one is about the maximum value. So maximum value, the NPV out of the out of the field. So how are we going to have the maximum NPV? Of course, you get the maximum recovery, you get the maximum reserve, and in the same time, you get the lowest cost possible. So the cost is become a very important element in the company's value or reserve, because with the low oil price, the cost become quite a major factor. And some of the company write off their reserve because it doesn't sustain economic value whenever the rate is quite low. So some of the unconventional resource in US or Canada, for example, because it has a long tail of production of the shale oil, it has to cut the reserve significantly because at that particular oil price, it's not longer economic. So we have to balance between the cost as well as the reserve, with the end result is the maximum value. So that's number one. The second one, we talk about reservoir management, is talking about the integration. So the integration not only about the reservoir engineering and the GNG, but also working together with the production people, because they're the one who are going to operate the wells. We also talk together with the facility people, how we understand the facility bottleneck, the limit diagram, how much we can sustain from the facility standpoint. Do we have a bottleneck on the facility or not? That also an important element of the reservoir management. And to some point also we involve legal, we involve many different team in the company related to the, for example, the gas sales agreement, the PSC production sharing contract deal, the what you call it, the fiscal terms. So those kind of things will affect the overall how we manage reservoir. So I'll take you a quick example. In Malaysia, for example, there's a terminology called THV, or threshold volume, which means that if you exceed a certain volume that you produce, then there will be a flip between the government portion and the company portion. So the way you produce also have to take into account this fiscal term regulation, so then we can get a maximum cash flow for the company, for example. And the third terminology on reservoir management I would like to use is this is a continuous learning process. So reservoir management never been a shoot and forget process. It's never been one-time process. It has to be continuous. So we do have reservoir management set up in the initial FDP. That's one thing for sure. But once you put the well field on production, we get some dynamic data, we get some understanding about how the reservoir behave, that it could be likely that you will need to refine your reservoir management, your operating strategy. Perhaps you have to do it in a different way, such that it will get a better result in terms of recovery. You get the new data and you reloop again the knowledge to get a better decision on how you manage reservoir. So integration, continuous learning, and maximizing the value, those are the three words that could describe reservoir management in the short term. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me take you through about GOR management. This is one of the important aspect of the reservoir management, especially on the fields that are in the saturated reservoir or at the bubble point. So this become a very sensitive or very important issue between the government as well as the operating company. Because the operating company, the interest, of course, try to produce the oil as much as possible, as quick as possible. At the same time, government is looking at the more on the long-term recovery. And one of the variables to make sure that both interests are served is how you're going to manage the GOR. So the first one, let's say we have a case of depletion drive. So you don't have a gas cap, you don't have aquifer, it's very weak or no aquifer at all. So normally in Malaysia, for example, we apply the GOR limit, or the government apply the GOR limit 1.5 RSI. So that is, if you start with the GOR 500, for example, you're not allowed to produce more than 750 scf per barrel. If you produce more than that, you have to shut in the wells. Why the government apply this kind of GOR limit? Because they want to conserve the reservoir energy. That's very obvious intention, because they don't want that when you produce very high GOR, the energy depleted, and then you have a poor reservoir recovery. Now, in the same time, we have to look at the benefit of doing pressure maintenance or possibility of secondary gas cap. So if you do in water injection in this kind of reservoir, how much is the benefit? Then if you have a quite benefit, then there is a merit for you to control GOR to some extent instead of, let's say, producing unlimited GOR. And this strategy could be different between the heavy oil versus the light oil, for example. In the light oil, your shrinkage loss, the changes on the reservoir volume, oil reservoir volume, is quite significant compared to the heavy oil with the less gas RSI. So this needs to be looked at to demonstrate that whatever GOR that you're producing as a limit, it will not jeopardize the long-term recovery. And also to look at the potential of having secondary gas cap that could become your extra energy. So if you produce the reservoir below the bubble point, the gas is liberated, but that gas is not going anywhere. It will percolate to the top of your reservoir and form secondary gas cap. That becomes the extra energy for you to produce the oil. And this has to be, of course, demonstrated with some modeling, some technical work to demonstrate that that would be the case. Otherwise, if none of this possibility of water injection or secondary gas cap possible, then we had just asked for removing the GOR limit, but it has to be quite clear. And normally, of course, government will not entertain very easy on the relaxing GOR limit, because to make sure that we do not hurt the long-term recovery. The second GOR management is, what if we have the gas cap? Okay, let's say you have a primary gas cap, it's a saturated reservoir with a big gas cap or small gas cap, whatever it is, then what will be our GOR management? Now, in the typical reservoir with the big gas cap, normally we will have number of rows of producer wells. So there is a one, which is the up deep well, you have maybe a second row until you have the terminal wells at the very flank. So the GOR management in this kind of reservoir would be, you will start with the up deep well, and then you will see that this up deep well has a high GOR. then you will choke back or restrict the well or shut in the well if the GOR is too high, and you let the energy and gas cap to push down the oil toward to your terminal well. Now, by the end of the day, this terminal well will also cut high GOR, of course. And in that particular situation, we need to see whether we can relax the GOR or we can drill further down deep either producer or any injection well to push the oil and the flank oil to the terminal wells. Now, this reservoir management, of course, could be quite different depending on the size of the gas. If the gas cap is quite big and become an enough source of energy for you to push the oil to the terminal and still have a reasonable pressure for you to produce the oil from the wellbore to the surface, that would be good. But if the gas cap is small, you may need to come up with a different strategy, for example, by complementing with either gas injection or maybe water injection from the bottom. The other situation that we normally see here is the solution gas drive with the gravity drainage. So the difference between this and the one before in the top here is basically it will happen normally in the high angle or the high steep deep reservoir. So when you have the high reservoir deep, maybe 15 degree or 20 degree, for example, and the kVkh is high, when you produce below bubble point, then you'll be able to allow the gas, secondary gas cap form at the crest. So the liberated gas from the solution will be able to travel up because of the high deep reservoir, and the kVkh is also high. Now, this is become a quite attractive recovery at the end. If you can form a gravity drainage, the recovery could be quite effective, even though, of course, it's not as good as water injection recovery. But this is something that we need to assess when we deal with the high deep angle reservoir and relatively high vertical permeability. Now, the last one here is about if you have a combination drive. Sometimes you have big gas cap, and at the same time also you complement with water injection. So the main idea of reservoir management in this kind of situation is basically to sandwich the oil toward to the producing point or to the perforation level. So in this case, we need to have a good control how the flood front move from the gas as well as from oil. So we need to make sure that it will mature at the perforation level about in the same time. When the gas cap, let's say, expand too fast, that meaning you will leave it down deep oil behind. At the same time, if you put injection too much, for example, water injection too much, you may get the up deep oil unproduced at the end of the day. So understanding where the contact position by running some case hole saturation log, for example, is one of the key diagnostic work to understand how the sweep is happening in the reservoir, so we can adjust amount of the injection water, or maybe if you have gas injection, to make sure that everything will be collapsing at the perforation level. Now, if this thing has happened, then you can further evaluate what is the benefit of doing the gas cap blowdown. Now, if let's say the well is not located in the optimum position, so you may need to chase the oil column. It could be below you, it could be above you by doing the side track. This is something that most of the field in Malaysia has been doing to chase the oil where it is by doing some case hole saturation and recompletion or side tracking to produce the bypass oil. Okay, now let's look at further a bit on the water flood management. So this is focusing more on the water flood. Now, in some cases, people say that, okay, I want to inject as much as I want to produce, or in other words, that your foliage replacement ratio is equal to 100%. Now, it could be correct for the case that you are in the undersaturated reservoir, there's no primary gas cap, you place your producer well at the top, so you're going to sweep the oil from the oil water contact toward the crest all the way. That could be true. But when we deal with the reservoir that you have some gas cap, for example, typical the reservoir that you have here in the Malaysia Basin or Sarawak Basin, you will need to allow the reservoir pressure to go down to some point. Why? Because you need to allow the gas cap to expand to push the up-dip oil to the producer well. Otherwise, that up-dip oil will never be produced if you inject exactly replacing what you produce, and you're just sweeping the down deep oil. Now, when you allow the gas cap to expand, the pressure will drop. In the same time, also, you have to make sure that your artificial leaf is able to keep producing the oil at the lower bottom hole pressure. And in some cases, in my area, that in the deep water, for example, we didn't have a gas lift, so then we thought that the pressure would be maintained all the time, but actually there's a slight drop in the pressure that caused the well is not able to flow because the water cut start increasing. So we have to redo the project with the additional gas lift, for example. This is something that you have to think through even in the beginning. Now, the pressure target here has to be set carefully to make sure the equal flood front between the gas cap expansion as well as the water injection from the flank. So it's not necessarily that VRR equal to 100% will be the optimum, will give you the optimum recovery. So the picture on the right here, this is, even though it's hypothetical, but actually it's resembling one of the actual case in our field, that the optimum VRR could be somewhere slightly less than 100%, for example. It's really depending on how big your gas cap here. If you have a big gas cap, you'll be having enough energy for you to displace the up-dip oil. Your artificial leaf will still be able to lift it, but if your gas cap is still small, you may have a different VRR target and so on. And it is also important that we understand the issue on the shrinkage loss as well as the gas cap resaturation. Some of the cases that you push the oil too much going into the gas cap and that oil become lost, you cannot completely recover this oil. So again, the optimum value will be the depending on the how much how is the reservoir architecture, how is your gas cap, as well as your water injection rate, and then your well location, because this strategy will be dependent on where you place your producer well. Are you placing the producer well at the middle between the gas oil contact and oil contact, or maybe closer to the gas oil contact? That would require a different reservoir management strategy. But whatever it is, it has to be consistent between your well placement and your reservoir management. So in bottom right here, this is describing one of the actual case, but I tried to not to disclose the field name. This is one of the example of a field where you manage the water injection and the gas cap expansion in the best way. So then you can see that the increase of the GOR in the red, they are happening in the same time with the increase of water cut. So meaning that your water injection displacing the down deep oil, and then your gas cap expand and then displace the up deep oil. Now, in some cases, you've seen that the GOR remain too flat and the water cut increase. That means that your up deep oil is not being recovered. Or in the other way around, the gas cap increasing because you don't inject sufficiently. So meaning your down deep oil is now at risk. So this has to be balanced to make sure that the maturity level of the GOR and the water cut will happen pretty much about at the same time. Okay, now I'm gonna go to this case study. I'll start with the case study number one, which is the recompletion opportunity. Let me give you a bit of background about the situation that we had in this one. So we had the well number one here and well number two, and then well number three. So the well is the reservoir A2 here is being produced from well number two, and supported by the injection from the well number three. So you can see here, this is the reservoir A2, you have injection and you have producer. This is the structural cross-section. So you can see the relative position on the structure of each well location. So the question is that, is it worth it for us to recomplete and perforate the reservoir A2 or potentially A1, because A1 and A2, they are connected hydraulically in well number one? So that is the question. Now, if you look at A2 performance, this is the reservoir performance or the historical production performance of well 2. So you start with a very high oil rates and then dropping off because your water cut is increasing. The GOR is some fluctuation, but it's pretty much flat. So do you think that we have oil in this one? Recognize that from the original log, you can see that there is a crossover neutron and density indicating that you have a full gas in the reservoir A1. and then you have partially gas in the reservoir A2. But the field has been injected quite some time from well number 3, pushing the oil to the well number 2. Now, if you look at the well number 2 here, this well is still making some oil. At the time, it's quite about 300 barrel oil with maybe around 70, 80% work at. Now, if you look at the structure here, so clearly that the base of the reservoir A2 in the well number 1 is slightly maybe up deep or about the same depth with the top sand of the well 2. So if this thing is making, let's say, 300 barrel oil, 70, 80% work at, so likely that you will have a lower work at in the well number 1. So that is the expectation. But then what about the gas cap? Does the gas cap expand? Because the pressure is slightly declining actually. So do we have a risk of having still gas in this reservoir? So if you perforate, you may end up producing nothing but gas. So that is the risk. Now, this kind of situation, of course, we need to assess from the concept of the value of information. Now, because we're dealing in this particular example is the offshore environment, where if you do recompletion, you have to mobilize the workover rig that costs you about $3 million. So there is a value for you to really understand whether it is oil or not before you're committing into the workover. Now, in the onshore environment, maybe we just go ahead and shoot and see what is producing, because the consequences of the failure is much less in onshore compared to the offshore. So in offshore, is the cost consequences quite high. So we need to think and spend the money a bit to understand or to de-risk the project, so then we know that it's going to be a success. So what did we do? Okay, this is another cartoon to show you the illustration on a simulation model. So the well number 2, the one that's been producing high water cut, based on the simulation that it water out, and you can see the movement of the oil column to the crest, and you see that the gas cap based on the model is actually shrinking. And why would the gas cap is shrinking actually? So it can be explained because in the past there was a well at the crestal which is accidentally produced a gas cap. We didn't know at that time it was connected to the reservoir. So it was produced for a few months, and then we realized that it's connected and we shut in that particular well. So the movement of the gas cap or shrinking the gas could be driven by that event of producing the gas cap. And in the same time, also you keep injecting from the flank that could push the gas cap toward to the crest. So the model predict that if you complete well number 1, you will have some oil and then some water at the base. That the simulation predicted. So then we ran the case hole saturation log to understand whether it is really gas or oil or even water now in the well number 1. So let me just take you through a bit on this log. This one here is the gamma ray. As you can see that you are dealing with a quite nice looking sand. And you can see the original neutron density, which is the gray area on the third track. You can see the separation between density and neutron. The same goes here. So this is your original gas oil contact. You can see on the far right track here, this is the interpretation of the fluid at the original condition. Then we ran the pulsar neutron tool, which is quite a good tool, to be honest, because we've tested different technology on the case hole saturation to understand how they behave in the same well, and then we follow up with some action in the field and confirm which one is more accurate. Now, the first curve that is run from the case hole is called TPHI, still the neutron porosity, which is based on the hydrogen index. As you can see that there is the increasing neutron or hydrogen index reading from the original, the gray one, to the purple one. The same goes here in the reservoir A2. So there is a changes between likely gas become liquid based on the TPHI or the hydrogen index log in this particular level. So it could be now it's not gas anymore from this reading. Then we go on to the sigma log. As you know, the sigma log is work based on the capture unit. So it is sensitive to the chloride content. Now, unfortunately, in this environment, we have a relatively fresh water. So it's about 20,000 ppm or sometimes even less. So the sigma is not really a good log for you to use to differentiate between oil and water. Gas typically has a lower sigma, so you can see some deflection here, consistent with the neutron, but it's not that really sensitive. So there could be some indication from sigma, but not really sensitive. Now, one thing that is really actually stand out in this technology is the parameter called fast neutron. Now, if the hydrogen index works based on the hydrogen atom content in the formation, which gas has the less number compared to the liquid, so that's why it's low. The fast neutron works based on the atom density. So the liquid, the rock, they have more or less the same atom density. When we come to the gas has very low atom density. So you can see that it clearly deviates from the overall trend and indicating that this is really gas. Now, in this particular example, you're dealing with the good rock, so it's not really an issue actually. Maybe the hydrogen index itself can clearly indicate, but if you deal, let's say, with the tight rock, or with the water field, you may not be able to use this log to differentiate where it's gas or liquid, because the reading on the hydrogen index will be quite low. But it will appear clearly on the fast neutron, even though in the tight zone. So you can see that this is gas, and below here is liquid. So now we can have a good understanding. Okay, my gas oil contact has moved from here to here based on the what you call it, this K saturation log. What about the oil and water? So we have the carbon oxygen and the total organic carbon log here. You can see that toward to the base, there's a reduction of the CO ratio, consistently with the TOC here, indicating that there is some water at the base of the reservoir. And the CO ratio at the top here is low because gas has a low CO ratio. So combining the gas identification and the oil water identification, we understand that the current situation, you have moved the GOC a quite number of meter here. So you still have left gas at the top, you have oil, most of them, and then you have a water at the base. So with that, we recommended at the time to perforate the section over here to stay away from the water and to stay away from the gas in the same time. So this is the cartoon to illustrate the original condition and then what you have in the current situation. So the water you've seen at the base, but this water is at the shallower depth compared to the well 2 because we believe there's some encroachment or gravity override due to the high permeability at the base. So the gas oil contact has moved quite a number of meters from the original position. Then we perforate, and this is the result of the well. So you can see that the GOR is very low, steady, meaning that there is no movable gas in that section that we perforate. And after some time, also we cut the water as expected because you have a water quite close from the bottom. So this is one example, a successful recompletion by understanding the reservoir behavior as well confirmed by the saturation log application. Okay, now I'm going to the case study number 2, and this is related to how we do overcome the low injectivity issue. This is the production history of one field in my area. So you can see it's quite strong production, about 10,000, but then you don't have any water injection because we had a problem in water injection. You can see the GOR start increasing, there's no water production, and you have to cut back the production from 10,000 down to the 5,000. And we are struggling here, GOR keep increasing, and then we don't have enough water injections. That is the situation that we had. Now, when you look at the reservoir quality of the injection well, this is the log from the injection wells, you can see that they're actually not that bad. Even if you look at the MDT data, the pretest data, some of them actually showing like 1 Darcy or 3 Darcy percentage points. Is quite high permeability. So the theoretical that you would get based on this reservoir quality, if you plug in into the nodal analysis, for example, then you will be getting around 11,000 barrel water to be injected at a certain wellhead pressure. But in reality, it's only injecting about 3,000. Now, in the other injector, we estimated it should be injecting about 2,000, but it's not injecting at all. It's zero water injection goes into this well. So what actually really happening in this reservoir? And this is a picture to show you that the gas cap has expanded because of the no water injection for quite some time in this reservoir. Now, one of the learning from this one also, we are being too aggressive, put the producer well too close to the gas oil contact, because we are thinking that, okay, the simulation predict everything, no issue. You can inject quite volume of water, so there will be no gas cap expansion at all. It will not happen in the early times, so everything will push to the crest. But in reality, we have a problem with the injection water, and your producer well is too close to your gas oil contact and gets out too quickly. So in order to understand what happens in the reservoir, why we're injecting much less than what we anticipated, so we went back into the some data in our reservoir, first starting off with the rock mineralogy. So what actually do we have in our reservoir? So we have XRD data here from the core. So you can see that a quite number amount of clay across your sand. So the reservoir section contains quite percentage of clay actually. Now, if you look at the clay distribution within the total clay, about 1/3 of that is actually kaolinite, which is susceptible to fine migration, to move. And you also have elite and smectite, which can swell when in touch with water. So there could be some issue. Just looking at the rock mineralogy, it could be some clay swelling issue. It could be some fine migration coming from the kaolinite. Then we also did the pressure testing. We do some injection fall-off tests, try to understand how the permeability observed from the pressure testing as compared to the log analysis. And you can confirm that the permeability you get from the well testing is very low compared to what you expected from the log. But there's indication it could be some dropping of the derivative at the end, and perhaps a new stabilization toward the end. There could be some radial composite behavior where you have very poor probability, packed low probability around the wellbore, and things getting better as you go away from the wellbore. That could be one of the interpretation. Of course, as you know, that there could be different model that can fit into the data. Now, the other thing that we acquire is the data on the step rate test, how much pressure to frac the reservoir, what's the frac gradient, and so on, because that would also be useful for us to understand in case we want to inject above the frac pressure. Then we went to the lab and do the core flood analysis. So we take the core plug, we inject the core plug in a very low velocity, a very low injection rate, and then you increase injection rate slowly. So you can see that when this is interstitial velocity, which is the injection rate, the feet per day. So when you increasing the injection velocity, you can start seeing that your probability is actually dropping. You can see it's dropping to a very low level. So it's like 10% of your original probability. Then when you do the reverse flow, you regain some of the probability, but not much. So this is indicating that there is a damage mechanism happens in the reservoir as you inject the water to the reservoir. And this has something to do with the fines migration. There is a critical velocity, which is the maximum velocity that the fine is still intact. But when you inject more than that velocity, then the fines start migrating and plugging off the pore throat. So that was the analysis. And it's further confirmed by the SEM photograph to compare before and after, when you see that clearly there's an alteration in how the pore throat is being plugged because of the fines, which is kaolinite, moving as you inject the water. So this is exactly the issue why we think that we can inject 11,000, but in reality only 2,000, because the injectivity around the wellbore being reduced significantly to the plugging pore throat from the fines migration. Now, of course, the next question is, okay, we have a fines migration, we have some issue on injection, so we have to do something about it, but how much the benefit of removing this issue? So this is basically understanding how much value that we protect if we were able to reinstate the injection rate as per design. So this is just a quick simulation slide to show you between two cases. If you do nothing, which is no further activities, so what happened to your saturation, what happened to your pressure distribution, as compared if you improve the injection, so you can have a better situation on your pressure, as well as better situation on your sweep or your bypass oil. So here is the graph to show you the benefit if you do nothing, which is this is your starting point. If you're able to inject more, this is what you're going to get. So, and again, as I explained before, that there's an optimum point for your injection rate. If you inject too much, recovery also will go down. And depending on how much you produce, also there's an optimum, different optimum injection. This again back to the how you want to operate, how you manage your reservoir, how much injection or production you want to get, and that should be complemented by how much injection. That would be an optimum point. But this is to indicate that if you were to rectify the problem, you're looking at about up to 12% recovery improvement, which is quite a lot of value considering the amount of STOIP and the monetary impact of this situation. So what we did, basically, we embarked two things. The first one is we drill geosteered well. So if you remember that one of the issue why there's a fines migration because the velocity is too high. So in order to lower the velocity, that we have to have a bigger area to flow, the wider cross-sectional area for injection water to flow. So then it will be more distributed and the velocity will be, interstitial velocity will be much less. So we drill a geosteered well in number of the well, and we can geosteer as long as 250 or close to 300-meter long hole in about 5 to 7-meter TST sand. So I think we have now a lot of technology that could help us to do the geosteering and stay within the sand for very long period. What did we use on this particular geosteering job? We use the resistivity image where you can, when you use this tool, you can see the above and below your bed, above and below your bit, quite distant. I think it's about 60 meter if I'm mistaken. So then that could have a good control on the structure below the bit, and you can steer the well accordingly. So this is one of the example when you drill the well and you can see the high resistivity bed below you, which is your reservoir top. So you can react whether you drop the angle or maintain the angle or increase the angle of the well drilling to make sure that you will stay within the reservoir target. Now, because this is the resistivity image, so then when it comes to below oil water contact, it becomes blind because there is no differences between the water resistivity and sail resistivity. So the bed boundary become less apparent as compared to if you just did in the oil reservoir. So in the below water contact, things are become more difficult and you can count on mostly from the density image rather than the resistivity image. Now, in addition to having the maximum exposure or maximum reservoir contact approach, what we did also, we embarked the high pressure injection. So if you remember how much injection pressure that we need to frac the reservoir, so we designed the pump or upgrade the pump such that it will be able to inject at the higher pressure, get a higher injectivity in the selected well when needed, especially on the vertical well or deviated well that doesn't have big reservoir contact. You need a higher pressure to achieve the injection target. So we use high pressure injection to achieve the target injection rate and get the proper support for our producing wells. So with that, actually, we managed to increase the injection rate from 3,000 up to 20,000. And then the oil production rate from the 10,000 initial drop to 5,000 and go back up to 15,000 and steady for the next 3 years after that intervention. It's quite a good story that reinstating the injection in this particular field is confirmed to give a very big value or protect the big value for the company. Okay, the last case study I would like to share is on the identifying the bypass oil. So this is the case study we have in one of the field. If you look at the well number A here, this is the producer well. And we have well number B, which is the injection well. Now, the big question that we want to answer is that, are we injecting well B supporting to well A in this reservoir or not? Because we have also other injectant from the north. So we are worried that the support that we are getting in well A mostly coming from the northern injector, nothing coming from the southern injector or well B. So we want to understand because the GOR in this well A is keep increasing over time. So where is the GOR coming from? Is the gas cap expanding or is it the injector in the north is pushing the gas cap to the south? Are we getting support from the southern injector or not? So in order to answer that question, we did a pulse test, between the well number B and well number A. So we varied the injection rate 0 and 5 or 7,000. And then we tried to observe the pressure reading using PDG in well number A. And this is the result. Basically, you have a very lazy, there's nothing observable that you can see from this pressure response. And this is as big as 0.16 psi. This is some undulation. It could be related to the tide as well. This is an offshore well. So there's no evidence that B is talking to A, basically based on the pulse test. And this pulse test could also be like this because you are dealing with the high GOR. So there's a lot of gas saturation around the well A that could absorb the pressure pulse because of the high gas compressibility. Now, well B is actually initially injecting in this reservoir, but then is commingled with the other reservoir. And then the risk is that when you commingle, maybe the injection to this reservoir become much less or none. So we don't see the impact on the well A as you pointed out, in this interference test or pulse test. So what did we do? We engaged actually soft oil in this particular case, try to understand, have a better understanding what exactly that affecting well A here. Is B affecting A? Is E is affecting A or any other wells in these MRT cells? And then the study from the soft oil is quite interesting because it's able to make a historical cross-well interference from the beginning of the well history until whatever the study was done. So you can reconstruct this with the subject well A and see whether there's any changes throughout the well life. And this is quite interesting to see that if you look at the pressure impact from well B, which is our injector, to well A, it had initially impact, but then after that, it's flat. So meaning that it has initial impact, but then stop impacting well A. And you can see that well E, injector in the north, even though it's far away, is giving a maximum impact to well A as compared to well B, which is closer distant. And also we have an impact from the other producer well, well D, which is also quite far away. So the conclusion from this study from the MRT is that well B is actually affecting well A initially, but it stopped affecting for some reason. And what this is a very important information to confirm our intervention plan, because if indeed well B is not affecting well A, we have to do something. And what we did is basically we went back to the well and we isolate other reservoir in the well number B and only injecting to this subject reservoir to make sure that we have good support in the down dip of southern part to well A. So that's what we did. So what happened in the production performance after we redistribute this injection? So this is the overall historical of well A. This is the injection from the well B. So you can see there is a no injection period when we did well intervention. And there is an injection distribution from this onward. Basically, we're only injecting in the subject reservoir. And you can see that once you inject exclusively in that particular reservoir, the GOR start to drop. You can see the GOR start to drop. The water cut flat and increase toward the end. And if you look at zoom into the decline curve analysis, the period when you start redistributing the water actually is kind of gaining quite some volume as compared to if you don't do anything. So if you don't do anything, meaning this trend here, if you do nothing, do not do the injection redistribution, you will have this kind of trend. And actually it's quite replicating the trend from before, because this is just because of the operational problem on and off, or restricting the flow because of the high GOR and giving a higher gas rate than the facility can accommodate at the time. So the oil rate versus the NP plot suggesting that by redistributing the injection rate, you kind of gain quite a number of EUR if you compare to the do nothing as the previous trend. So now the further question is, now you start cutting higher water cut. Now we have to go with another cycle of optimization to further balance the flood front from the north and the south flank to make sure that the oil will be converged into the well A location. Okay, I think that's all I have. Some brief introduction on the reservoir management and some case studies to give some feel on how you apply it in the field, what kind of value that you protect, and for the value that you enhance to in your asset. Back to Vladimir.
Ronnie, thank you very much. That was a real treat. Thank you so much. Very interesting. Thank you for your reference to our job together with Softfoil. So we have several questions from the audience. I'm starting with the question number one. The pressure impact curves in the last case, is it coming from a 3D model? Right. Well, if you don't mind, I can take that.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Vladimir. It's your project.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. So, just a few more words about this case. So, there were several problems here. So, we really had an issue about the connectivity between wells B and A, and it was really unclear, is B even supporting the pressure around A? Is the water moving in this reservoir from down deep to up deep to the oil saturated zone? So one of the biggest problems was to reallocate the injection in well B, because shortly after it was brought online, the B was recompleted and became commingled. So it was not very clear which part of the injection actually goes into this particular reservoir. So we performed a whole study. We had some tools at our disposal. We had completed production logging tests and the pressure pulse tests, which Ronnie was talking about before. But we used another technology. We just used the well A as an offset well, because A was supposed to be benefiting from the injection in B, and looking at the trend in well A, the pressure and rate trend, we tried to reallocate which amount of injection in B is actually going in this reservoir where well A is completed. So this is a mathematical technology based on the deconvolutional processing. And the curves that you see on the screen come directly from this deconvolutional technique. So we are now able to see, not involving the numerical modeling, we're able to see which well supports the pressure the best. And here, as you can see, well, I think Ronnie said quite pretty clear about this case. So it's a water saturated layer which has an oil rim and a gas cap above, and these injectors B and E are pushing this oil rim along with the gas cap to the north or to the south, and whichever of these wells are winning, it's pushing the gas cap further back. And we see that in well A, for example, as beforehand well E was clearly winning, so well A has a high GOR, which has later reduced when we redistributed the injection in this reservoir in well B, and the B opposed the injection in E. So this is actually the case. Thank you very much for the question. The next question is, if the oil moves up deep into the gas cap, as in one of your cases, would you expect its mobility to be less than where it originally was due to residual gas? Yeah, that is a nice one.
So if the oil moving to the gas cap, what happened is that you will have some oil loss because of the trap oil in the gas cap, right? So some of the oil that moved to the gas cap, even though you push the oil down from the gas cap, there was still some oil left in the gas cap. So that become the gas cap shrinkage or gas cap loss, basically, or gas cap resaturation. So what happened to the mobility, basically depending on whether if the gas solubility in the oil is still more or less the same, then there'll be no much of mobility changes into the oil and migrate to gas cap and coming out of the gas cap. Now, one thing that maybe I haven't explained clearly on this reservoir architecture, that if you, even though you see the gas cap there, there's a liquid bridge underneath of the gas oil contact. So there is a liquid connectivity from the north to the south. So that's why the well number E, for example, even though it's far distant and in a different flank, you can see a quite immediate response or have a significant impact to the well A, because there's a liquid bridge from the north to the south. So when you push the injection from the north, some of the oil will just display to the southern flank, but some of the oil will be smearing into the gas cap a bit, and then perhaps it will be pushed down again to the southern flank, but that would leave some residual oil in the gas cap and become lost. But that loss is still considered relatively low as compared to if you have to drill, let's say, infill well in between and try to get the additional oil. From the economic perspective, it is better to manage a reservoir like this and leave with some gas cap resaturation loss as compared to if you invest the money and then drill a gas injector or the infill well at the crest.
Thank you very much. That was quite clear. The next question from an old friend. Good presentation. What is your view on injecting water in the gas cap?
Injecting water in the gas cap.
Into the gas cap, right?
Into the gas cap. Okay, there is a strategy done by Exxon back in early 2000. So they have, let's say, similar situation like that. They have the gas cap, and then they have the development of peripheral water injection at the flank. But the interesting thing what they did is that they inject water at the gas oil contact. So the idea of that reservoir management strategy is that they want to create a pressure barrier in your gas cap so there is no movement, and you try to prevent the oil to migrate to the gas cap. But when we look at that particular field back in 2007-8, it is proven that actually there's still some gas cap shrinkage, because it's quite impossible for you to really make a strong pressure barrier continuously along your gas oil contact. So there's still some movement to the gas. So I wouldn't recommend to inject the water in the gas cap. If you need to make sure you have good recovery from your up-dip oil, I would recommend to use the gas injection. Now, when you go into the gas injection or water injection, what really matters is actually how much residual oil to the gas versus to the water, right? Now, in my experience, most of the core that I've seen, that the residual oil to the gas is actually smaller compared to the oil. But the issue is that you have to make sure you don't have a gas fingering, you have a uniform gas cap displacement, you have to inject gas in a reasonable speed, so then you can sweep the up-dip oil more or less uniformly, and you don't lose so much of pressure that you can flow the oil from the wellbore to the surface.
Thank you very much. I fully agree, by the way. The next question is, does the reservoir have any limitation on the GOR that needs to be produced? And if yes, what is this limitation?
For which case? This one or which one?
Well, I think we're still talking about the last case.
Last case.
Right.
Okay, now the reservoir management for this, we came to the government and said that there's no way we can produce this reservoir while adhering some GOR limit. Because at some point when you inject from the north and try to push the oil toward to the south, it's unavoidable that you will produce the gas in the same time, because the gas cap will be tilted, it will be pushed, some of them toward to the producer well in the south. So the consequences of doing that strategy is that you will produce high GOR. So because of that, we came to the government and said that there's no way we can restrict the GOR, and we have to have a no GOR limit, but we have to make sure that the pressure is being maintained relatively. And how we're doing that is you have enough injection water, because this is a high permeability rock, so it's not an issue. So you inject the water consciously in a higher rate and push the oil and gas to the south, and you produce oil together with the high GOR. So in this case, there is no GOR limit applied.
All right. Thank you very much. And I think it will be the last question. And it seems like this is the question for me. For the MRT technology, how do we know or prove that the mathematical equations works correctly? Is it a non-unique solution like PTA? True. That is a very reasonable question. So, of course, as any of other reverse tasks, it is the solution is non-unique, and we have several ways which we've developed over the years on how to restrict the area of where we're trying to find the solution. So it would be the most probable solution, let's say. So this technology beforehand has been tested many times, and we have numerous papers in SPE. And by the way, the last SPE paper, which is precisely on how this technology was tested, is being published right now after the OTCA, which I believe closes today. Right. So please refer to the paper, and in the paper we describe the way on how we tested this algorithm together with the client and made sure it actually works. Well, I think that's it, guys. Thank you very much. That was the last question. So, dear colleagues, it's time for us to wrap up. I want to thank again Ronnie for the brilliant presentation. Also, yeah, thank you so much. Also, thanks to all our guests for your attention, for your questions. Now, if you're watching this in record and you still have some questions, please hit nafta.college. The link is in the channel's profile for our web forum, and we'll be happy to continue communicating. So I wish you all the luck. Please be safe. Let's thrive together our way through these weird times, and stay tuned for our next webinars. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you all.